Hi, welcome to this second webinar about modernizing .NET applications. Today I will be presenting with Sean Devlin, one of my colleagues here in the US team, and together we will discuss a bit more in detail on how to reuse business logic that you already have in your .NET application. Part 1 last week was about selecting your front end. This session was recorded and will be posted soon on our website. So if you missed part 1, then in a few days you'll get an email from us with the link to the recording. This session will also be recorded, so and that link will also be emailed to you. And then we have 4 more parts coming up in the next weeks about modernizing .NET applications. So just before I start, Sean, is my screen properly visible?
Yeah, it is, Jan.
Okay, great. All right, we also have a questions channel, so if you have any questions during this session, then feel free to post them in the questions channel. We will try to answer them either during the session if it fits within the 25 minutes that we have for this session, or we will get back to you directly, email or by phone. There are a couple of questions that came in by email, are these 4 that you see on your screen right now. We will be discussing them, a couple of them during the session and a couple at the end of this webinar. So today we're going to talk about connecting to your existing logic and database, separation of business logic and design, and some of the patterns that we see of ISVs that have done this. It's important as you start modernizing .NET applications to also look at your non-functional requirements. And of course, the key of applications are the functions. But your non-functionals are equally important, so you have to make decisions and select platforms and frameworks that support the non-functional requirements that you need to deliver applications with a great user experience. And now we're going to dive a bit more into the technical details of the different, well, these are the most common ways to reuse existing .NET business logic, whether that's written in C#, C++, or in Visual Basic, even in some cases, or VB.NET. There are different ways of reusing it. Each of them has benefits and downsides, and Sean Devlin, one of our senior engineers here in the US, has quite some experience in helping ISVs on .NET to make these steps. So hopefully Sean can take it over from here to zoom into these different ways of connecting.
Yeah, well, we work with a lot of software vendors, and we see that many face this challenge to adapt a legacy application to a modern front end. And it's really about striking a balance between, rapid application development, getting a product to market quickly, also architectural flexibility and having control, and then there's total cost of ownership, building and maintaining not only source code, but also all the other components in your stack. You have to maintain those as well. And of course, all of this must also be balanced against having a great UX. So in our experience, what we see is that unless you're a really large shop with a lot of developers and testers, you really can't have it all. You're going to face trade-offs. So it's better to pick your priorities up front and then to fall short on certain expectations. So the custom sort of roll your own approach is, I think, ideal only for shops that really have the resources and have the budget and the timeline for it. So of course, all applications have backend data sources, and depending on the degree of logic which you have embedded in the database through maybe stored procedures or functions or triggers, it's easy to quickly reuse these features using JDBC or ODBC connectors. You can also take advantage of middleware object relational mapping tools and effectively model business objects in your middle tier, and that can help with programming and also help with user experience. Some things to consider is that it's only accessing the database. It's not reusing any logic that's already in a middle tier. So it'll only get you that far. We see .NET's Web API offering. This is a lightweight alternative to build RESTful web services. And it's ideal, of course, because REST is standards-based. You can connect directly out of the browser. So although no middle tier is required, we see that direct data binding from a browser to a web service, kind of bypassing that middle tier, although it's productive from a development standpoint and simplifies it from an architectural standpoint, it can compromise the user experience. So if you think about sort of bulkier transactions that require a full round trip plus back-end processing before you get some reaction in the front end. This is because you don't have that middle tier to provide that level of nuance. REST is, of course, stateless, so if you want to have a better UX, you have to make up for that statelessness somewhere by having statefulness down in the browser, which can be difficult to program and maintain and test and debug, or perhaps you can introduce tools at the middle tier that can give you stateful session management, and that can improve the UX. Maybe it's worth mentioning the WCF offering from .NET. What we see is that Microsoft no longer actively develops it. It was originally intended for SOAP, which is kind of a dying communication protocol. It was meant more for server-to-server communication. And so it's totally impractical to consume SOAP in a browser. They did add support for REST. So, you know, if you already have WCF programmed, then okay, maybe just review the previous slide, and it's basically similar to that approach. But we're not really seeing that as recommended for any new development. It's more for maintaining legacy systems. So then the successor to that is ASP.net, the core MVC offering. And yeah, the jury's still out on this newer framework. Microsoft is introducing new frameworks frequently, so without sounding too skeptical, I'm curious how long this one will last or how far it will go. It is a tag-based templating language or a framework, so it's very kind of old school, similar to Ruby on Rails or even Java server pages going back a couple decades. So it's a markup templates that bind to controllers and dynamically replace content on the server. So that has the advantage of adhering to the true MVC design of separating UI from business logic. It's just not embedded in the front end. But that said, there's no front end offering to this framework. It's really just that templating server side. We see that shops are combining this with whatever front end technologies they choose, like even newer stuff like AngularJS. So from a UX point of view, it's possible to achieve the UX that you want, but there's really a lot of work involved because you do have to code up the front end yourself. The developer has to develop and maintain their classes, their markup fragments, their client-side JavaScript, the communication layer, be it WebSockets or AJAX to the browser. So the total cost of ownership for this approach is pretty high. Again, you get total flexibility and control, so it goes back to that trade-off of sort of TCO versus flexibility. So in our experience, we see the greatest success with ISVs when they can combine two or more approaches and go for a hybrid model. We like to see it driven from the user experience. So if it's starting from what UX do we want, what kind of front end do we want, and then okay, what architecture do we need to support this, we see greater success in delivering applications. In the real world, we're seeing a lot of JDBC, ODBC for reading data, and then where necessary, writing back through business logic connectors, web services in many cases. to do the right. So the business logic is still respected, but you get all the benefits of object relational mapping tools and fast performance on the reads. Because if you go sort of a monolithic approach, hey, we're going to do web services, everything's going to go through our business logic layer, then great from an architecture point of view, great from a simplicity point of view from developing, bad from a UX point of view because you're dealing with overheads for the reads and unnecessary sort of transactional metaphors in the UI. So we've really seen great success when we work with ISVs with a hybrid approach. I think any ISV who wants to modernize a legacy platform is facing this challenge of many times business logic is intermingled with the UI. If you've done something in Visual Basic or something like that, you have the UI and the business logic tightly coupled. And we don't see this any magic for this. You really have to make sure these are decoupled before you can move forward. I think it's more a matter of planning and executing that rather than it being a full monolithic first step. We see greater success with software vendors taking on modernization projects when they actually say, okay, what user experience do we want? What architecture do we need to support it? And then finally in the back end, what business logic do we need to decouple from the UI and repurpose in some way in order to support that and do it sort of piece by piece in an agile fashion rather than saying, well, step one, we have to decouple our entire legacy product into web services, and then step two, we can start to build on top of that. It's better to do it kind of in thin, deep slices. So, you know, the next question is how do you get started? In most cases, we are consulting with ISVs to first focus on the business cases and develop a minimum viable product rather than a big bang approach where we're going to build everything out and then deploy it in one go. If you can establish a minimum viable product that has business value, then you can go on sort of a module by module approach and do it with Agile. Jan, maybe you want to say something about the automatic conversion approach, because we see some people asking about this from time to time.
That's right, yes. Yeah, and I've been around in this business for about 25 years now, and you know, automatic conversion has been a long-standing dream of many organizations. However, it is very difficult to do it in a successful manner. Although technically it is possible to build converters that work, the result is always that you get unmaintainable code, and on the long term it's not a viable solution. So we see that most successful ISVs choose for an approach where they rewrite very often module by module. If it's a smaller project, sometimes even a big bang approach. But most of the times module by module, where you can start with one small part of your application, start learning, start finding out what your development time and cost is, start estimating properly, and then move on to larger parts of the system. Because very often applications can coexist, where you run, for example, your back office maybe still as a native .NET application and your front office through an HTML5 app in browser and mobile. There are many situations in which it is perfectly viable, where they can coexist, and in some cases we even see that large parts of the backend are not rewritten at all, and they just stay maintained in the .NET code that they were originally written in. But you know, there are no two the same ISVs, so we see that every case is different, and that's why when we engage with an ISV, we do this together to find out what is the specific goal and benefits for your customer, for your user experience in doing this. All right, if you have any questions, meanwhile, feel free to post them in the questions channel. So today if you look at the non-functionals that we were that are sort of part of the decisions in this section, then you should be looking at UI component independence, which is getting a lot easier with HTML5. There are many libraries that you can now choose from. Development efficiency, if you choose some of the classic approaches such as MVC, then it can be very inefficient for your developers, where modern tooling can help you in doing this quicker. At the same time, as you're building out your applications, don't forget about the scaling, the security, the performance, and last but not least about session management. This is often overlooked. Many developers are looking at stateless applications. Business applications that are stateless are extremely rare. Business applications very often have a state somewhere. One option can be to move that state to the browser, but it can be very time consuming to program that, because they're essentially duplicating whatever you built in your backend to your front end. So having a stateful middle tier to the browser, which is relatively is often an approach that can help accelerate modernizing business applications. So, well, first, some information on this slide. So, if you have any questions after the session, feel free to contact us. As you're making a choice, it is important to look at the overall architecture of what you're doing, and to really let the user experience drive the choices that you're going to make. It's not only about selecting a front-end framework and then kick off the development, but you have to look at the total picture, including all the non-functionals that you will need as you're deploying to HTML5 and to cloud-based applications. So, for the sake of time, let's move to the questions that have been coming in. And Sean, if there are new ones coming in through the questions channel, then feel free to interrupt. Sean, maybe this first one is interesting for you to answer, as you have some experience in this section. Which approach is the most used in your experience?
Definitely when we have something called an app assurance program, where we consult with the software vendor who's facing a modernization project, and we help to decide upon an overall approach. And the most common approach that we agree upon is one that is a hybrid approach, that is a mix between reusing legacy business logic. Generally that's through web services or some kind of standard connector, in combination with using newer tools. So there's a lot of tools around JDBC connection that can really add productivity and nuance to the user experience. Additionally, I would add that in that sort of evaluation, what we do is kind of case by case on each sort of unit of business logic, and also driving it from the user experience. So what user experience do you want? You know, what's the status of your current business logic? In many cases, we see that there's really two different kinds of logic that we're talking about. There's core business logic about, you know, data integrity and workflow and how things have to be data-wise, like business rules. But there's also, I'll call it maybe softer logic or ancillary logic, where many times this is code that's written because of the tool that it was written in, and when you port that to some other tool, a lot of that just goes away. So we have to look at, almost holistically and say, for each case, are we going to connect to this through web services, or does this move to the middle tier and become part of a stateful application? So it's really kind of case by case.
Okay, thanks. I'll take the next question about training. As we've been involved in quite a few projects, we do see that if developers come from the more 4GL-like Microsoft environments like Visual Basic and FoxPro, strictly not .NET, but it is frequently seen. Then moving to environments where you have to do all your coding in HTML itself can be very challenging, and then choosing frameworks that are more using the same paradigms as your existing technology stack will definitely make it quicker to get staff trained. And in some cases, you may need to add staff to your team. Very often we see that classic ISVs don't have UX specialists on the team. In today's reality, it is very important to get UX specialists on your team. If you're a very small ISV, then you can typically outsource that to UX specialized companies. We know a few if you're interested. And if you're a larger ISV, then having in-house user experience experts that are part of your Scrum team, that are part of the deliverable of all of your sprints is important to have. And typically, those guys are not software developers. They are more on the design side, but as we've discussed in the previous session, UX is much more than just design. It's also about truly understanding your users, involving your users in the whole design and delivery process, getting the user stories out, and also getting their feedback on frequent releases is important to do. The third and fourth question have been covered a bit earlier in today's session. Like Sian said, on separation of UI and logic, if you don't have that done yet, it will have to be done. It is going to be painful. There is no easy way of doing this. But if you use an agile approach, then you'll run the least amount of risk in getting it done within a reasonable time frame. And automatic conversion, our experience with many ISVs is that it's generally not a very good idea to do. Right, in sake of time, we promise to stay within 25 minutes each session and have short topics every week. Today's recording will be posted on our website, and you will get an email with the link. Next week we'll be talking about a lot of cloud considerations, how to look at multi-tenancy, how to deliver customizations in a multi-tenant environment, multilingual issues, and other topics as you're moving your .NET application to the cloud. So look forward to seeing you in next week's webinar, and thank you very much for attending.